I came to LA in 69. What happened to me was I saw a bunch of films that just put together the disparate parts and sort of started making me what I was as a DP. And I was transformed and imprinted like a little duck. The way they move the camera, the way they use the cut. And then that was really what I've always been interested in. When I first came to cinema, it was through those two doors.
A new movie lands in theaters called The Fishing Place, directed by the indie maverick Rob Tregenza. The Fishing Place has drawn high praise, with rave reviews from Richard Brody in The New Yorker calling it spectacularly conceived, and that Tregenza is an artisan of the highest order. Manohla Dargis of The New York Times calls Tregenza an authentic independent who holds you rapt. Rob Tregenza has done a bit of everything in the world of art house cinema. As a director, his films drew so much critical praise that he received a retrospective tribute from the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. As The Fishing Place rolls out to theaters across the U.S., we asked Rob to join us for a wide-ranging conversation about art and the search for meaning and beauty in cinema. Join us now on Inside the Arthouse.
Hey everybody, my name is Greg Lemley, and welcome to Inside the Arthouse. Today I'm again without my usual co-host, Raphael Sbarge. He's a working actor and he's on set, but it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation with my old friend, Rob Tregenza. Hi, Rob.
Right. Hello, Greg. You're aging well.
Thank you. Well, you too. Something about good cinema that keeps us young, right?
I think so.
Well, it's perhaps not always about who we work with, right? I guess, let me start with this quote I found online, which is that all great DPs become alcoholics.
Yes. That was a product of frustration. You know, one of the funny things about being a DP is that you're sort of like stuck between the director and the crew, and then you have to sort of sometimes translate both ways. You have to translate what the crew, you're not supposed to translate what the actors think, but you have to get the crew's information to the director. And then you have to sort of mediate that. And so that was a reference to a scene I was shooting with Béla Tarr on Werckmeister Harmonies. And it was like a kind of a funny day, a long shoot late at night. And the scene was set up. Everybody was drinking in a bar. And so it was kind of problematic, right? And, you have actual alcohol with actual actors around crew in a remote location somewhere in Buda and Pesh, things can get out of hand a little bit. And so Béla Tarr, who was the director, and I was trying to sort of keep the crew together and sort of keep the actors together, but not direct, because obviously that's one of the problems. You're a DP, you're not the director.
You're not the director.
And so the level of frustration, Greg, was just sort of like, rising exponentially. And that sort of, I asked for a drink, right? And because everyone was drinking, and I've been known to have a little California wine upon occasion, and so that was it was halfway through the night, and Béla sort of in an authoritarian way said, "No, you can't have any wine," and so that was the sort of thing where that started. But I spent some significant time with Chris Doyle, who's an amazing DP.
Absolutely fabulous. Great work with Wong Kar-wai and others, among others. Man. Yeah.
But every time I saw him, he was participating with the grape. And so that was, or some variation of it. And that didn't seem to.
Well, there's got to be a lot of tension, I imagine. I mean, you're arguably in control of the single most unique facet of movie making, which is the visual, getting the image on the camera, and you're kind of in control of that, and yet you're not in control of it because you're responding to a director who has a vision, you're responding to a crew that actually has to make the shot happen, and it's got to be incredibly difficult.
It is.
Is directing your relief from working as a DP sometimes?
I hate to say it, yeah, it probably is, because when you're directing, you have literally the buck stops with you. I mean, you can sort of pass it over to the producer, but the decisions that are made ultimately come down to the decisions you make, and then how consistent you are with those decisions over the period of how many days, 20 up to 45, and consistency of visual style, acting style. Once you lock into the performance and lock into the visual style, you have to maintain it, and you also have to be able to go forward and back from that style, right? So if it's a situation where you're doing a historical film or something where you got to do one period with one look, the next period with the next look, and sort of go through the mediation of time and space and place, and retain somehow continuity of image, dramatically, thematically, it's a mouthful. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to try to retain. But I think the good DPs actually, the ones that are like Robbie Mueller, you look at people like that, they were always able to somehow come into the environment and sop it in, drink it in, get the sense of what it was, and then maintain some sort of artistic continuity over the whole length of the shoot. Mm-hmm. And they were the great ones, and they're the ones I think you go back and look at Mueller's work and just find it enlightening, put it mildly.
Well, we have a little bit from Werckmeister Harmonies that we can look at just to, maybe ease us into a conversation.
Vízóra, záróra, fájróra. Várjuk már még egy kicsit, hogy a Valuska megugassa.
All right, and we're back. I mean, it's a interesting scene to look at. There's a sense of motion, and yet I guess the camera's fixed the whole time, correct?
No, it moves the whole time.
It moves the whole time. Okay, I thought maybe it was that the camera was sort of stationary, but obviously the where it's looking.
It's a panther, okay, basically a European, a German camera on the panther, mm-hmm. And so it goes forward and then it goes 360 degrees around one way, and then 360 around the other way, and then it comes back up and pulls up high and comes back down and does another 360. So it's consecutive 360-degree moves around the actors, and then the actors are rotating like the planets. So it's a visually complex, difficult shot. That was the scene, of course, at the end of which I asked for a drink.
So it's frustrating as much as you wanted that drink. You do use the style very much. Right. I think in Fishing Place.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always liked to move the camera, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's. I started out. I came to LA in '69, and basically at that point, I had three things I was kind of interested in. I very much liked still photography. I was a still photographer. That's how I got into the arts, and then I also liked. Music, and the third thing was history. So those were my three things. And then what happened to me was I saw around like 68, 69, a bunch of films that just sort of changed or put together the disparate parts and sort of started making me what I was as a DP. And initially it was La Jetée by Chris Marker, and it was, and I went into it because I was looking at the stills, right? I liked the way the stills were framed. And then there's that penultimate shot where there's motion, right? Mm-hmm. And that just all of a sudden sort of like stuck something in my head, and I realized, oh, there's motion pictures, right? And then the second one after that, I went to see Through a Glass Darkly, mm-hmm. Bergman film. Yeah, right. And then after that, I saw L'Avventura, Antonioni, and then I saw Night and Fog by René. So once I went through the art house, so to speak, I was transformed and imprinted like a little duck on that kind of image, and the way they move the camera, the way they use the cut. And so that's when I started being interested in motion picture. not because I was in L.A., but not because of, quote, Hollywood, but basically I was literally inside the art house, and that was sort of where my mind started growing, and then I sort of started looking at that kind of stuff. And then that was really what I've always been interested in the moving camera, and then the abruptness of the cut, or should we say just the visceral nature of montage, always was the two things that when I first came to cinema, it was through those two doors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, look, and you talked a little bit about the technical aspects of the camera that you work with, but we forget that a lot of what we think about is, changes in cinema, changes in language, the French New Wave. A lot of it was also technical in nature, the lighter cameras, the ability to move with the camera. I'm thinking of the great, the shot of them running in Jules and Jim, or certainly, among many other things. And these are things that they were able to incorporate into their directors and cinematographers were able to incorporate in their filmmaking, just because the technology had changed in some respects.
Yeah, I mean the technologies. What I was trying to do when I was in quote film school, I went to San Fernando Valley State College initially.
Is that Pierce or Valley College? It's either Pierce or Valley College, probably now, or Cal State Northridge, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
That metamorphized into Northridge.
There we go. Okay, which has a great cinema program. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I haven't.
Okay.
They never talk to me. I don't know what they're doing, but I hope they're doing good things. Anyway, but I went there, and basically what I was interested in was how you make a movie, not why you make a movie. Mm-hmm. And so I was interested in Hollywood and L.A. because I basically wanted to figure out how do they do that, right? Because at that point at Northridge, they really didn't have hardly anything. I mean, we had very little equipment. I mean, it was just terribly, shall we say, penurious. But I started learning about production, storyboards, breaking things down, strips, assistant director's breakdown, all those things that have to do with how you make the movie. And that became sort of an interesting part for me. And then secondarily, because we didn't have the technologies, as you mentioned, there was this sort of quest to how do I get my hands on professional technology, which meant 35, right? Because we had a couple of ARRISs, some non-sync 16. So my interest in cinema initially, even though I came through the art house, was very quickly, how do they make this stuff? Now I came back and said, why do they make that? Of course, that was a political thing, happened a little bit later, but it's just initially why, and then initially how. So I took everything of the classical Hollywood, breakdown boards, strip boards. We used to have the old strip boards, the thin pieces of basically cardboard, and that is what I took away really from the Hollywood experience, was how they made the movies and the efficiencies out of the studio. So I still like when I make quote art films, I make them very much within the traditional studio setup. Like the last film, The Fishing Place, was shot in 10 days with no overtime. And that was only possible because basically I did everything the old-fashioned way. Yeah. I didn't have the strip board. Now it's computerized, but breaking it down, the assistant director breakdown, doing it within meal penalties. Even though we weren't union, I still use the Hollywood or studio system to understand how I can efficiently make an art film, because I've been through too many death marches in, quote, art cinema, right, where you're out there until 3 a.m. and no proper turnaround time, and it's just like, you're doing it for the art, and essentially the actors and the crew end up being exploited beyond belief, and the hours are impossible. So I said, no, I'm going to take what I learned about how you make a movie in Hollywood and apply it to how I make a film there. So like, Fishing Place, 10 days, no overtime.
Amazing.
The one before it, Gavagai, 8 days, no overtime. The one before that, Inside Out, shot in 9 days with overtime. Have to be honest there.
Okay.
And then
You're allowed.
The one before, I'm allowed. But still, 8 days for a 2-hour film. And then one before that was my biggest budget film, was ARC. That was 18 days, but we shot in L.A., not in L.A., sorry, shot in Baltimore and shot in New Mexico. So had to put travel in there.
Right.
First day, talking to strangers, 9 scenes, 9 days. So if I hadn't sort of had the poverty of starting off within a studio system with an art house mentality, I would have never had the efficiencies to do what I want to do. And the other thing is technology. I mean, the lust for the 35 millimeter camera was just overwhelming. And then the cranes. Cranes were always, to me, the epitome of what Hollywood did. And back to Universal, of course, they had the greatest crane in the world. They had the big crane, the crane that did Broadway, the crane that did, what was the one after that, All Quiet on the Western Front. Mm-hmm. They had, the studios had the equipment, right? And then eventually I was able to sort of rent some of that stuff, and we got way back when we were renting from F&B Seco. So we sort of gradually got our hands on the tools. And when that happened, it was the second part, okay? You need a professional tool to make a professional image. And you need to have the scheduling and the budgeting to be able to make a professional image on a budget. And so that was sort of the legacy I kind of got out of LA at that point. And then in I think it was 1976, I got into UCLA graduate program. So all my freelancing, I would freelance as anything. I would be an assistant editor in the camera department, production department. It was just like I was non-union at that time. There was a lot of work, more work in LA then than there probably is now. And I would jump around, and it's like, that was that. And so in 76, big changes in my life. I was in a band. I had to get out of the band. I had to get serious about my life.
Filmmaking or music? School. Filmmaking or music?
Yeah, I couldn't do both, Greg. It was like, okay, so basically that was the big time, 76, boom, change. And then I get in UCLA, and then all of a sudden my interest at that point becomes, okay, why do they make movies, right? Mm-hmm. And went from the how to the why. And that became, I think, a lot more intellectual, and then it became more theoretical. Then that's when I started getting into Godard. That's when I started moving into a more theoretical discourse. So my time in LA, I was in LA for about 12 years. And then I got married and moved back to the East Coast. So it was a good time. I learned a tremendous amount from the time I spent in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would have, I wouldn't think I'd be sitting here kind of making the kind of films right now I make if I hadn't gone through that doorway and hadn't experienced that. I mean,
you've had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. So, it's fair to ask you, where is the distinction? Is there a line between art cinema and studio cinema, I guess, at some level, yeah. But more specifically, I guess, on that idea of film as art versus art house.
Right. Well, I think art house is a distribution concept, really, an exhibition distribution category. And it's a good one, because I think if you don't make that distinction, then you end up having to just sort of assimilate all of the commercial product that's sort of thrown at you. So it's sort of nice to say, okay, we have certain canons of validation. They may be flexible. They may change given the box office and whatever. But, there's a concern for an initially art film. Now, of course, in your tradition, your family, it was a concern for European cinema. So you had a situation where you were like Europeans in LA, and so you still carried an old world sensibility, and that came through the productions, it came through your studio, it came through what you're doing. So in a sense, art film was a European film, and art film
anything that wasn't English language,
anything that wasn't quote studio. But Greg, the majority of it was studio production.
Absolutely, and
so I mean, you're all looking you were looking at films that were produced in Germany, and very studio stuff, in France studio stuff, even Sweden, and so it was like, although it was sort of international cinema, it sort of became art cinema because it was not American cinema. Mm-hmm. But then underneath that, there's a secondary layer, which is a concern with the subject of the nature of the beautiful and the nature of the good, which sort of runs you into looking at aesthetics and ethics. So those 2 points are sort of different in, quote, European art cinema than what's predominant or what was predominant in North American cinema. Because the concern there was, I think, essentially more box office than it was, shall we say, the nature of the beautiful and the nature of the, quote, good. And so there was a kind of a different mentality, in a sense, between a European studio film, although they were still motivated by capitalism, right? They had to make money. But you look at all the European directors that came over in the 30s, right? I mean, about every major director out of France and Germany came here. And what they did to the studio system was basically rewire it, right? And so you were moving from Griffith into this sort of European thing, Lubitsch and the rest, and then you sort of move out of that back into the Americana, and then we move back to Europe in the 1970s, and at that point that becomes really the art film, right? Then it becomes unabashedly, quote, art. People like, Fellini, Antonioni, Bergman, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's a completely valid thing to say that we're interested in art cinema because there's still a concern with the nature of art, and that carries with it cultural baggage, aesthetic baggage, concerns with things like the sublime, concerns about things like transcendental issues, concerns with what is the nature of poetics or poetry in the art form itself. And a lot of those issues, in a studio context, they just sort of disappeared or dissipated.
Right. So that brings us maybe perhaps to The Fishing Place, which is your new film that we want people to see.
You can edit this, Greg, right? You can make me sound articulate or
no. It's a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate having it because I guess even at the most crass level of a big budget studio film, you can have moments of art.
Yes.
I don't want to say that it's not present or not possible to have it present there. It's not the primary focus of the people making the film. They want to make money. It has to
be present, or it's not going to work. Okay, it's one of the intangible, ineffable things where beauty and truth have to endure, even in a pile of blank, because there's a sense that what is it that attracts the human being? It is the soul. It is the essence of beauty or truth that somehow is announced poetically, right, in the context, in the event. So all cinema has to, whether it likes it or not, has to touch into the poetic, the metaphorical, has to touch into the dream, has to touch into those states of consciousness that may be not intended by the studio, right? But essential for communication, or essential for it to work. And that's the art, the poetry, the intangible is the thing why Hollywood has not been able to make a blockbuster after a blockbuster. If they had their way, as you know, every film would make $300 million. Every film would be knocking down the box office. Every film would work. Everyone would be successful. But look at the percentage of, quote, financially viable pictures that come out of Hollywood, or not just picking on Hollywood, out of the studio system anywhere, and
even out of Sundance. I mean, let's. Okay. Any film festival doesn't have to be Sundance.
You're going to get me in trouble. I'm trying to make a point that you got to have art. You got to have art, even in because if it's not there, it's not going to work. And that you can't predetermine it. You've got to find it when it happens, and or allow it to happen, or let it to announce itself. If you sort of try with research and scientific methodology to come up with the perfect film, right, with the perfect star, with the perfect studio, with the perfect writer, with the perfect DP, that seems to be a recipe for box office failure.
Right. Yeah.
Which your ancestors attempted to do. They got the stars, they got the cranes, they got this, they got...
I think they had a human element.
I think they did.
That is missing today at some level, or because people are trying to remove it, and they're trying to use whether it's AI or data-driven research or everything to come up with all these answers. And sometimes, you have to try. Look, are filmmakers storytellers or are they artists? And maybe there's no difference, but which
I think a good filmmaker is a poet.
Okay.
Right? And I think that they have to be storytellers and they have to have all that other stuff. But touching back on this kind of ephemeral point we're attempting to make, you have to get down to the metaphor or get down to the symbol or get down to something that moves people emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. And if you can get there, then you have a chance of creating a new language or creating a new situation, new art. That's what we want to do, try to do, and this very system, Greg, is prohibitive in many ways to the enjoyment of that in the theater or the creation of that on a soundstage. Hollywood, any studio system, whether they like it or not, have to find those random elements. And if they can't find them or don't find them, then there are other places that are going to open up that find them. Other cinema, other experiences, other ethnicities. You know, the Jewish Europeans came and made large sections of quote, Hollywood studio. They were educated, they were erudite, they were civilized. They had cultural advantage. They came from Vienna. They came, fill in the right. Okay, they weren't your average sort of off the street LA person. And they were bringing a cultural context into the American experience that enabled the American experience to morph in some ways into other states of experience and consciousness. But they brought the arts with them, and they brought language with them, culture with them. It wasn't a lot of that was not, shall we say, predetermined in L.A. With the orange groves.
Well, we had sunshine at least, so we could shoot outdoors.
Yeah.
So let's come to the fishing place. How does that all come together? All this experience of watching films, of making films, of distributing films. How does that all come together into what you are trying to, both a story that you're trying to tell and an experience that you're trying to give to your audience when they see this movie?
I've come a long way, Greg. From where I started, and I think that I thank God for that. I think the fact that I'm not the same person I was 40 years ago. At the same time, I think these somehow remain very similar to what you are. So there's this sort of the dichotomy, the paradox. I mean, we kind of move forward, and yet we also maintain elements of who we are over time. And I think one thing that sort of helped me was exactly that sort of, we will call it, for the sake of this discussion, the art house experience, because that was what I cut my teeth on. That was what I was interested in. That's what I'm interested in now, right? So in that sense, that hasn't changed. Now, how we make films, the technology's changed, the cultural context changed. We now are in a society where politics matters more than art. And so it seems that in many ways, all the cinema that's being made, or most of it, that's either made A, for festivals, or B, for commercial distribution, is running through the Frankfurt School and running through neo-Marxism. So you basically have ended up with a situation where the subject of aesthetics is now politics, whereas aesthetics used to be a legitimate area of discussion of what is the nature of the beautiful and the sublime and the true. And now it is what is politically correct. And I think in the process of that change, that arc, right, the movement of artists, right, within it is sort of circumvents. You sort of have to go this way, go that way, and you're making judgments that are not based, shall we say, essentially on aesthetics, but you're making judgments often that shall we say, are more politically expedient than they are artistically necessary. So those changes, okay, have affected how artists position themselves, and even more importantly, how audiences have positioned themselves. What they'll choose to go and see right now is a different kind of cinema than, shall we say, before the advent of the domination of the Frankfurt School vis-a-vis universities. So now it's like people, I can't see that film because that's not politically correct. So, okay, they throw out all the cartoons, throw out most of the comedies, throw out all the stuff that was sort of like most of Lubitsch. You've got to get rid of that. So what are you left with? What are you making films? You're making films about things that are politically correct or that are accepted by the universities or accepted by the distribution companies. And that shuts down huge areas of human emotion, huge areas of narrativity, huge areas of subject matter. And then all of a sudden you say, well, I have to make a film that can make it in Sundance, because if I can get it in Sundance, Harvey's going to come along with a big checkbook and he's going to write $5 million and he's going to make my career. Or fortunately, I'll say fortunately, that's not going to happen anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But that was the dream, right? Also, all
For
of
a long time.
like,
Yes, for a long time that was the dream.
We have to make the movie that Harvey can pay the check, write the check. And he's writing checks for stuff that he thinks he likes, that he thinks he can make money, that Miramax can make money off, and then he changes them. Oh, I'll change the ending. Yeah. Oh, I think we should do this. So it's like okay, well, whatever it was that you liked about it at Sundance, why does it have to go back and be re-edited and remixed and blah blah blah? I'm getting off the subject, but I mean those intervening variables, okay, in the art of cinema, shutting down areas of subject matter and content because of predetermined political positions, shutting down areas of distribution because it doesn't match the personal taste of individuals with too much power. Shutting down the discourse because, we don't like poetry anymore. We just want scientific fact. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think compromise the art, right? And in the compromising the art, those intangibles, those things we were discussing about 10 minutes ago, those get shut down, right? And where do you find beauty? Now, where do you find the sublime? Where do you find the divine? Where do you find these awkward little things that make us human, right? And that make us, in some ways, better human beings than we actually are. If we get them out of cinema, we take them out of the discourse, out of the conversation, and ultimately they come out of the art house. They're taken out of the art house as well.
Well, and hopefully we won't take them. Hopefully we will still be able to find them in the art house. That's my goal.
Well,
that's my commitment.
Lemley will have it. Everyone else will be gone. But I mean,
there's something that yes,
right.
We may be in a place where we are not allowing ourselves to be challenged, whether it's politically or whether it's with the films that we see. We are going for comfort food, and so we need to try and do something that's a little outside that comfort zone.
Right.
And see a film that may not entertain us, but we may learn something from the movie.
Right. Or it may strangely move you, right?
Yeah.
Strangely move you.
Yeah.
Somewhere, right? That you
you're going to think. Look, you're going to think about something, and it's going to stick with you, and it's not going to be immediately apparent. The film, A Fishing Place. So you open with a scene of someone looking backwards. The camera's moving.
Right.
There's forward motion. She's looking back, and yet several times during the film we hear that we shouldn't look back.
Right.
Well, so which is it?
It's both. You have to do both. I mean, it's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to mention one of the earlier precursors is Lot's wife, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, I'm.
Yeah, but there's also the whole myth of Orpheus and with Cocteau and Godard. I mean, that also comes from Godard's whole fascination of looking back that you have in Alphaville. So it's all of these Don't Look Back, and of course the great Don't Look Back by Nicholas Roeg. I mean, all that is part of the game. Right, visual game that's being played. And also you have the idea that if you look back, do you turn into a pillar of salt? If you look back, do you then disappear back into Hades, right? Mm-hmm. If you look back, what happens in the whole Cocteau myth, right? And then you have to say, well, I have to look back, but I have to look forward. And how do I look back and look forward at the same time? Well, you have to do that, right? That's the problem. That's the paradox.
That's being human.
Right? And that's being human, right? And so it's I like that image. I mean, that image is basically in my mind. I wanted to have a feeling that they were being pulled to Katahdin, the town, that they were being pulled into it, and that as they're being pulled into it, we are being pulled into it, right?
Right.
In the theater. So it was it operated metaphorically, poetically. It also operated physiologically. I want the body to be involved in cinema. I want to get your body and your brain involved. And I think when that happens, then associations start happening that are I won't say unique, but different, right?
Right.
So that's one reason I like the wide screen. I like the big screen. I want to get things up that are huge, and then immersive in a sense, and then go, boom, get away.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's another paradox, right? Where you have the sense of scope, literally CinemaScope, right?
Just bigger,
and then
almost.
you pound it down to a close-up, right? Or you use a sound effect. I like to mix 7.1. My last 3 films are all done sound sculpture. I want to put sound in the theater with the surrounds and around you that literally pushes on your body, right?
Right.
That literally sort of gives you a sense of place. And then the image is up there, which gives you a sense of space. So you have place and space in the theater, something you do not have on your cell phone. Ta-da! You don't watch Fishing Place on that. Well, you can.
You can.
You can. But
you can. It won't be the same experience, but you can.
I want them to go to your theaters, Greg.
Yes, well,
I want them to sit in a theater.
Yes, indeed. Talk to me. Can I ask you about your relationship with the person, with the filmmaker, with Jean-Luc Godard?
Godard was, first of all, I would never have made Inside Out without him. He was literally the co-producer of that film. And then we got to Cannes, and he like a week before that, he decided he didn't want anything publicly to do with it. So you have this sort of strange thing of like, he helped with the casting, he did funding, he was invested in it. He got my actors for me. He did all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I think I just want to go back to role, and I don't want to be bothered, right? So rather than deal with the fact that we had to deal with that, we just ignored it, right? We didn't talk about it. We didn't, we just went to Cannes, played the film. Basically, whenever we could, we would sort of separate ourselves from Jean-Luc, because he basically said he didn't want to be publicly associated with it. Not because he didn't like it. He loved it. I mixed the film in roll in his studio. And every night he would come down and watch the dailies, not the dailies, watch the mix. And then we'd go out for dinner, and he'd smoke, always had the big cigar. And we had a wonderful time. Good food, good wine, good conversation. He was a cinephile. You could just sit and talk to him about movies and philosophy. And he was self-educated, self-taught, absolutely brilliant. So he was, he made my second half of my, quote, career. Right? Without Inside Out, I would probably be, I don't know where I'd be. Frankly, I don't know what I'd be doing. But yet at the same time, there was that sense of, well, we couldn't push the relationship because we didn't want to so to say, trespass on his privacy. And so that was basically that. But in terms of his intellectual imprinting on me, I knew about Godard, but back to the 70s. 1976, I got to UCLA, and they had a professor there who was a visiting professor, named Brian Henderson, and he showed us that scene in Weekend, the long dolly shot that goes on and on and on. It's actually three cuts, 3 shots, but you first look at it, you think, oh, it's a 10-minute take, parallel dolly move. And that was when things started in my mind. Godard started mattering. It didn't matter. I'd seen Breathless. I'd seen a couple other things, but that just turned my head around. And then Brian said, go read Jean-Luc Godard on Godard, it's a collection of his readings. I read that book, and there was two sections, an article called Montage My Fine Care, which was about editing and the long take, and also his interviews when he did Vivre sa vie, and had to do with the idea of using what he called this type of what he called it, the definitive by chance, which was the idea that you would shoot one thing once and never again, and that basically you would use it as a way to sort of bring forth in the sort of the poetics and the structure of the shot, things that would not be possible without that. So it was a very almost mystical concept, which I don't think he continued on through, but you read that. So that's why Talking to Strangers is 9 shots, shot 9 times, 1 time. So all this is going on, and then I got into distribution, which back to that point. and I was distributing films. I picked up Hélas pour moi, and also JLG. So for 3 years, I was his distributor, and after every screening, I would send him the box office and how horrible it was in many cases. But I wanted him to see, okay, I'm doing something here.
Yeah.
Right here.
The films are playing. Yeah.
They're playing, and this is it. And he never wrote me back. I would just like putting a bottle in the ocean, throwing it out there. And finally, he decided that he wanted me to distribute one of his later films, Forever Mozart. And I frankly said, Jean-Luc, I was honest. I said, we're not in a position to distribute that. We had Satan Tango, we had Damnation, we had a film by Rivette called Up Down Fragile. We had The Seventh Continent.
Michael Haneke film.
I was trying to book The Seventh Continent. You booked it.
Well, I played it.
You took it. And nobody, Greg, would play Michael Haneke anywhere.
Yes.
It seemed theatrically. And we're trying to distribute The Seventh Continent. Anyway, long story short. So Godard calls me up and says, okay, I want you to do this. And I said, Jean-Luc, I'm just sorry. I don't think we can do that. So he said, well, come to Paris. I want you to come to Paris to look at it, and maybe you'll change your mind. And I said, well, I really don't think I can do that. And he said, well, come to Paris. So my wife got the New York Times, right? That time that you go, there was like a section where airplane tickets were real cheap, so they dumped them at the end of the week or something like that.
Right.
So she's like going through the New York Times and finds this ticket to Paris. And then Godard phones back and says, go to Washington, D.C. to Dulles, and there's a ticket waiting for you there, and come to Paris. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I go to Dulles. I'm not someone that flies first class or business class, but business class on Air France.
Not bad.
It was like wild. Here I am, poor little filmmaker in business class.
Very nice on someone else's dime.
Very nice on somebody else's budget. So I drink a little bit too much champagne. Maybe we're back to the first point, Greg.
We've come back.
Drink a little bit too much champagne, get off Paris, go in hotel, boom, wake up the next morning. I'm looking at the TV set and this water, and there's suitcases floating on top of the water. And I go, this is weird. And my French is, I got my PhD, my language was French. So I read better than I can listen. So I started picking out the words, and it's going like flight 800. And I go, and then they said flight 800. And literally I almost fall off the bed because the flight we were going to take was flight 800. We hadn't bought the ticket yet, but that was the one that was the cheapest flight out of New York City to Paris. And if Jean-Luc hadn't sent me the ticket, I would not be talking to you. So these are the synchronicities that are hard to talk about, but yet compound, shall we say, a lack of cynicism about life, or a sort of sense that there is something, a higher power, there is a greater good, there is something that imposes itself or interposes itself in our daily lives, that there, but for that, things would be radically different.
Yeah.
So he was at Gaumont. We were looking at a Gaumont. I walk in, he's smoking. I said, Jean-Luc, if you hadn't sent me that ticket, I'd be dead. I said, flight 800, I was going to be on flight 800. And he's smoking a cigar, right? He goes, throws the smoke out. No response.
Well, the mysteries of life.
Okay. Go see the movie, folks.
There you go. Absolutely,
please,
yes.
Please.
No, it is worth seeing. The film, Rob Tregenza's new film, The Fishing Place, it opens February 7th in New York. We're going to wait a little bit. It opens March 7th in Los Angeles. And I know we're trying to get it to play in art houses. Not we, but Rob is trying to have it show around the country. It may not play a full week. It may not play several weeks. It may have one screening or a couple screenings, but it is worth searching out. Challenge yourself to see something that's a little different, but you will enjoy it. You will find something to appreciate, both in the craft of the filmmaking and also just what it makes you think about and what it shows us about our world. Rob, thank you.
You'll find something beautiful I think that's my final. Go and see something beautiful. The world needs it.
What is it? The ode to Grecian art. Truth is beauty. Beauty is truth.
Well, I'm not always sure about that. But
Okay.
beauty, Greg, something we're lacking in this cultural context.
Rob, thank you for joining us
Thank you
Inside
so
the
much.
Art House. Thank you to everyone for joining us Inside the Art House. Go see a movie.
Yeah, in a theater.
There we go. Yes, in a theater. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Our show was produced by Raphael Sparge with on-site producer Norrin Dickerson. Supervising producers are Miles McCreary and Thomas Cassetta. Our show was edited by Gabriel Lemley and mixed by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme was composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr. Marketing by Gabriel Lemley. Show graphics by Jenna DeAngelis and show open edited by Rick Pratt. Filmed at the historic Lumley Royal Theater in Los Angeles, California. See you next time on Inside the Art House. If you like today's show, please consider subscribing to our channel to hear more on Inside the Art House.